Hello lovelies, in this video we're going to be going through your AQA GCSE Psychology Paper 2, the paper that we've written for 2024. So what we want you to do is to look at how we've structured the answers, look at how we've laid things out so that you can do the same in the real exam.
This is section A, social influence. You should answer all the questions in this section. There are 25 marks available, and in the exam you should aim to spend 25 minutes on this section. Identify which two of the following are examples of prosocial behaviour. Shade 2 boxes only. Option A, ignoring someone in need. Option B, sharing resources with a friend in distress. C, teasing classmates. D, volunteering at a local charity. And E, engaging in gossip to damage someone's reputation. Prosocial behaviour refers to actions that benefit others or society as a whole. So for this question, the correct answers are B and D. B, sharing resources with a friend in distress, shows prosocial behaviour as it involves providing assistance and support to a friend who is in need. Sharing resources, whether they be emotional or physical, reflects a really positive and helpful attitude towards others. Option D, volunteering at a local charity, again is another clear example of prosocial behaviour because it involves dedicating your time and efforts to contribute positively to the community without expecting any sort of personal gain. This behaviour really does reflect a genuine concern for the well-being of other people. Now let's just take a quick look at why the other options are incorrect. Option A, ignoring someone in need, is an example of antisocial behaviour or unhelpful behaviour because it neglects the opportunity to provide assistance and help when it is required. Option C, teasing classmates, is generally considered a form of negative social interaction because it could cause emotional distress or harm to other people, and it does not align with the concept of prosocial behaviour, which aims to promote the well-being of others. Option E, engaging in gossip to damage someone's reputation, again is a form of antisocial behaviour. It involves spreading negative information about others, which again is contrary to the positive and helpful nature of prosocial actions. Identify which of the following statements summarises the conclusion of Piliavin's subway study. Shade 1 box only. Option A, people are generally unwilling to intervene in emergency situations. B, the likelihood of receiving help is influenced by the gender of the person in need. Option C, bystanders are more likely to help when the victim is perceived as deserving. And D, the diffusion of responsibility has no impact on helping behaviour. Piliavin's subway study, conducted in the 1960s, aimed to investigate factors influencing bystander intervention in emergency situations. The correct conclusion statement is C. Bystanders are more likely to help when the victim is perceived as deserving. This statement aligns with the findings of the study, which revealed that bystanders were more inclined to offer help when they perceived the person in need as deserving or more worthy of that help. The study suggested that factors such as the perceived severity of the situation, the apparent legitimacy of the need, and the personal characteristics of the victim played a crucial role in influencing bystander behaviour. Now let's examine why the other options are incorrect. Option A, people are generally unwilling to intervene in emergency situations. This statement is too broad and does not accurately reflect the findings of Piliavin's study. The study did not conclude that people are generally unwilling to intervene. Instead, it highlighted the influence of specific factors on bystander intervention. Option B, the likelihood of receiving help is influenced by the gender of the person in need. So while gender can be a relevant factor in certain situations, Piliavin's study did not emphasise the gender of the person in need as a primary determinant of bystander intervention. The study focused on perceived deservingness and the nature of the emergency. Option D, the diffusion of responsibility has no impact on helping behaviour. This statement is incorrect, as Piliavin's study accurately demonstrated the presence of the bystander effect, which involves a diffusion of responsibility in emergency situations. The study found that the number of bystanders present inversely affected the likelihood of any single individual offering help, supporting the concept of diffusion of responsibility. Piliavin's subway study was a field experiment. Briefly evaluate the use of field experiments in psychology. There are 4 marks available for the question. The mark scheme tells us to achieve in the top mark band, so 3 or 4 marks, that the evaluation of field experiments should be strong and in-depth. There should be clear conclusions, the structure should be cohesive, and technical language should be used throughout the response and in an accurate and an appropriate way. So a couple of things just to pick out from the question. We know the question is asking for an evaluation, so there needs to be the consideration of both the strengths and limitations of field experiments. And it's a great time to remind yourself of what a field experiment is. So this is a study that isn't carried out within a laboratory setting, but actually carried out in the real world. Here's the model response. Field experiments will have high external validity as they take place in natural environments, making the results more applicable to real-world settings. This increases the generalisability of findings. Participants in field experiments are more likely to behave naturally since they are unaware they are in an experiment. This reduces the likelihood of demand characteristics, leading to increased validity by gathering genuine responses and reactions. Field experiments may suffer from a lack of control over extraneous variables, reducing internal validity. Not being able to manipulate or control the environment may lead to confounding factors, potentially reducing the accuracy of the results. The response provides a really well-structured evaluation of the use of field experiments in psychology. The initial paragraph starts by highlighting a clear strength of field experiments, talking about their high external validity due to their occurrence in natural environments. The use of technical language here, such as external validity and generalisability, really does enhance the response and demonstrates a clear understanding of psychological research concepts. This is the type of detail and in-depth exploration that's needed for that top mark band. Moving on to the second paragraph, the answer identifies another strength related to participant behaviour. The use of the term demand characteristics shows that technical language can be used well. The explanation of how participants are more likely to behave naturally in field experiments due to their unawareness of the study gives a clear outline of why this is a strength. The third paragraph introduces a potential limitation of field experiments, specifically focusing on the issue of control over extraneous variables. Again, the use of technical language such as internal validity and confounding factors shows a clear understanding of the research method. The response effectively explains how the lack of control over the environment may lead to confounding factors, thereby reducing the accuracy of the results. So overall, the response gives a really balanced evaluation of the use of field experiments in psychology. It considers both the strengths and the limitations of the method. By clearly explaining why each of the points is a strength or a limitation, it gives that detail and extension and provides really clear conclusions. The structure is really clear and obvious, each evaluative point being presented in a separate paragraph, and there is fantastic use of technical language throughout the entire answer. PhET made sure that the male victim was dressed the same and behaved the same in both conditions. Explain why this was important. There are 3 marks available for the question. We can see from the mark scheme here that it's looking for knowledge and understanding of standardisation procedures, and it says that these should be well explained. The answer must have a clear structure and be cohesive, and technical language should be used throughout. The key focus of the question is why this was important. Why was it important that PhET made sure that the male victim's dress and his behaviour stayed the same in each of the conditions? When we look at the mark scheme, and it tells us that we are specifically looking for standardisation procedures, keeping things consistent throughout the experiment, we must therefore be explaining why this standardisation was so important to PhET's study. Let's take a look at this model answer. The male victim was dressed and asked to behave the same in both conditions to make sure the experiment was standardised. This would reduce the impact of extraneous variables, making sure that any differences in helping behaviour were caused by the manipulation of the independent variable, the victim's condition, drunk or disabled, and not because of any other characteristic. This increases the internal validity of the study. So this response offers a well-structured and a concise explanation of why PhET ensured the male victim was dressed and behaved consistently in both conditions of the experiment. It starts by clearly identifying standardisation as a primary reason for this practice. The use of the term standardised is a key piece of technical language that immediately communicates a clear understanding. The answer then goes on to provide a brief but still very detailed explanation of how standardisation helps in the experimental context. The length and the content of the response is appropriate for a 3-mark question. It highlights the goal of reducing the impact of extraneous variables, ensuring that any observed differences in helping behaviour can be attributed to the manipulated independent variable, specifically the victim's condition. By adding in this detail here and the knowledge of the two conditions, again really adds to the quality of the response. The mention of extraneous variables and independent variable again shows a clear understanding of experimental design principles. The response finishes off by stating the consequence of this standardisation, which is increased internal validity. This shows the overall impact of the methodology and directly addresses the question, why was this action taken? The use of the technical term internal validity again adds depth and detail, demonstrating a clear grasp of the key concepts. So in summary, the response effectively combines the clear identification of the reason behind maintaining consistency, the standardisation, with a concise but still a thorough explanation of how this practice improves the quality of the research. The use of appropriate technical language really does enhance the response and makes it a good, well-rounded and informed explanation. Describe and evaluate how culture can affect collective behaviour. There are 6 marks available for the question. If we take a look at the mark scheme now, it clearly tells us what the response should look like if it is to achieve 5 or 6 marks in the top mark band. It says that the understanding of how culture can affect collective behaviour is evident throughout the response and is well explained. And then this is followed by an evaluation of how culture can affect collective behaviour. And again, this should be strong and in depth. It should offer clear conclusions about the impact of culture. It should be cohesive, and technical language should be used throughout the response and always in a specialised and appropriate way. So just to unpick the question further, we know that there are both describe AO1 knowledge marks available and evaluation AO3 marks available too. So there'll be 2 distinct sections to the response, but all this needs to be focused on how culture can affect collective behaviour. So we'll be specifically looking for some cultural differences to show how collective behaviour might differ across different cultures, but the focus being on this collective behaviour. How do people respond in a group situation or when the behaviour could benefit others? So let's have a look at an example response to this question. Whether a culture is individualistic or collectivist will impact on behaviour. Cultures like the UK and US will focus on individual goals, while those like Korea and China will focus on collective objectives and the success of a group. This influences decision-making, cooperation and competition within groups. The cultural norms guide behaviours within a group, and shared values will influence the choices and actions that people will take. Socialisation, someone's upbringing, will teach individuals what their culture thinks is important and guide them to behave in certain ways. This is supported by Early's 1989 research, which compared participants from China and the US. The study involved individual and group tasks, revealing that Chinese participants show more effort in both tasks. In contrast, US participants showed more effort in the individual task indicator and higher concern for individual judgment over group success. This evidence demonstrates how cultural differences will cause people to behave differently in collective settings. However, a limitation in understanding the influence of culture on collective behaviour is generalisation. People can overlook individual variations within a culture. Relying on cultural stereotypes can lead to unfair generalisations. For instance, assuming that all individuals in the US will prioritise individual performance may oversimplify things, and unfair conclusions may be drawn about cultural groups. The response is a good explanation of how culture can impact collective behaviour, and it uses a clear and logical structure. It starts by identifying the critical factor of whether a culture is individualistic or collectivist. The inclusion of specific examples, such as the UK and US being individualistic, while Korea and China are collectivists, adds the depth needed for the top mark band. The response uses key concepts like socialisation, norms and values in its explanation, and again this increases the depth of the understanding. By emphasising how cultural norms guide behaviours within a group and shared values influence choices and actions, the answer really effectively illustrates the ways in which a culture shapes collective behaviour. The use of these concepts really does enrich the response. The separation of the description and evaluation into distinct paragraphs contributes to the response's clarity and organisation. Each section serves a specific purpose, with the description setting the stage for the later evaluation. It makes sure that both parts of the question have been addressed and the AO1 and AO3 material is presented. The evaluation itself is well structured, featuring a strength and a limitation, and each of the evaluative points is clearly identified, followed by a concise but thorough explanation of why it is a strength or limitation. The inclusion of supporting research from Early's 1989 research adds more detail to the response by including specific findings such as Chinese participants showing consistent effort in both tasks and the US participants displaying a higher concern for individual judgment means that the answer moves beyond just general statements and it provides concrete examples that again strengthen the argument that is being made. The attention to detail is what really enhances the overall quality of the response. Describe and evaluate dispositional factors that affect conformity to majority influence. There are 9 marks available for the question. If we take a look at the mark scheme here, it clearly outlines to us what needs to be done and included in the response to achieve in the top mark band and to achieve between 7 and 9 marks. It says that the understanding of dispositional factors that affect conformity to majority influence should be evident and they should be well explained, and this should be followed by an evaluation of the dispositional factors, and again this should be strong and in depth. Conclusions made throughout the response should be really clear. There should be a clear structure, the answer should read well and be cohesive, and technical language should be used throughout and always in an accurate way. To unpick the question further, we know that it asks for 2 things, a description and an evaluation. So we know that there are describe AO1 knowledge marks available, and there will also be AO3 evaluation marks available. There'll be 4 AO1 marks and 5 AO3 marks. You should also take this opportunity to remind yourself what is meant by dispositional factors. So now these are internal factors, they are unique individual characteristics of a person that can impact on the way that they behave in the actions that they take. So in the context of this question, what are those internal factors? What are those unique characteristics that might affect whether someone conforms to the majority or not? These dispositional factors could include things like individual personality traits or the expertise that certain people have. Let's take a look at this sample answer now. AO1 knowledge material will be highlighted in blue and AO3 evaluation material will be highlighted in pink. Personality traits can play a role in shaping an individual's susceptibility to conformity. Individuals with an internal locus of control may resist conformity, relying on their own beliefs, while those with an external locus may conform more, seeking external guidance. Those with an external locus of control, who think that their behaviour is decided by other people and controlled by fate or luck, could be more likely to conform to the views and directions of the majority. Additionally, self-esteem plays a significant role. Higher self-esteem leads to lower levels of conformity, as confident individuals trust their own judgments. Individuals with lower self-esteem might conform more, driven by a desire for social approval and acceptance. A strength of this explanation is that it recognises individual differences. It explains why majority influence will affect people in different ways and how their personality type can influence their behaviour. We know that not everyone behaves in the same way. Humans are very complex, and dispositional factors allow us to see how different people will be influenced in different ways. A limitation is the impact that situational influences can have and how they can override dispositional effects. Situational factors, such as the presence of an authority figure or the urgency of a decision, can significantly impact conformity levels. For example, individuals may conform more in the presence of a strong authority figure, regardless of their dispositional traits. This limitation shows the complexity of conformity and shows the need to consider how dispositional and situational factors may interact. Another limitation is the lack of cultural consideration. Cultural norms and expectations can shape the extent to which individuals conform to majority influence. For instance, collectivist cultures may place a higher value on conformity, leading individuals from these cultures to conform more. The limitation shows that to understand conformity, cultural differences will need to be considered. So this response to the question on dispositional factors affecting conformity is well structured and provides a clear and concise explanation. The description is effectively separated from the evaluation, contributing to the overall clarity and cohesiveness of the answer. The initial description identifies key dispositional factors such as personality traits and self-esteem, and introduces the concept of locus of control, enhancing the depth of the understanding. It also includes specific examples related to personality types, and locus of control adds precision and clarity to the description. For instance, the explanation of individuals with an external locus of control being more prone to conformity provides a really concrete illustration that supports the broader concept. The use of these specific examples shows a real understanding and demonstrates a practical application of dispositional factors in real-life scenarios. If we move on to the evaluation, the response presents a clear strength by emphasising the recognition of individual differences. The point is very straightforwardly identified, and the explanation elaborates on how personality types can influence behaviour. The mention of humans being complex and dispositional factors allowing for an understanding of individual variation adds depth to the evaluation and really highlights why this is a strength. The limitations are similarly well addressed, with each of the points being clearly identified before them being explained. The explanation of situational influences, such as the presence of an authority figure, illustrates the potential for external factors to override the internal dispositional effects, again reinforcing the limitation. The second limitation regarding cultural considerations is very succinctly presented and underlines the need for a more inclusive approach that considers both dispositional and cultural factors. So in summary, overall this response really stands out because it has a really clear structure. AO1 and AO3 material is really easily identifiable. It includes specific examples throughout, and it gives a balanced evaluation. Both the strengths and limitations have been included. This is section B, language, thought and communication. Answer all the questions in this section. There are 25 marks available, and in the exam you should aim to spend around 25 minutes on this section. Identify which of the following statements best describes Piaget's theory of language and thought. Shade 1 box only. Option A, language is primarily acquired through imitation and repetition. Option B, language development is mainly influenced by social interactions and external stimuli. Option C, language depends on thought, with cognitive development playing a crucial role in linguistic abilities. And option D, language acquisition is solely determined by genetic factors and innate language models. The correct answer here is C. Language depends on thought, with cognitive development playing a crucial role in linguistic abilities. Piaget's theory of language and thought says that cognitive development is integral to language acquisition. According to Piaget, children progress through distinct cognitive stages, and their language abilities are closely tied to their cognitive development. As children develop more advanced cognitive structures, their language becomes more complex and sophisticated. Option A is incorrect, as Piaget's theory emphasises the role of cognitive development rather than just imitation and repetition in language acquisition. This option really hints at social learning theory. Option B is also incorrect because while social interactions are considered important, Piaget's theory places more emphasis on the internal cognitive structures guiding language development. Option D, finally, is also incorrect, as Piaget did not believe that language acquisition was solely determined by genetic factors. Instead, he emphasised the interactive influence of cognitive growth and the environmental experiences on language development. Person A and Person B are each fluent in a different language. One day they visit an art gallery featuring abstract paintings. Person A, whose language has specific terms for different shades of blue, effortlessly distinguishes between different colours and can talk a lot about what they have seen. However, Person B, whose language lacks specific blue terms, struggles to articulate differences and recalls the paintings less vividly. Use your knowledge of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to explain the experiences that Person A and Person B had. There are 6 marks available for the question. We can see here that the mark scheme says to achieve the top mark band, understanding of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis should be clear and evident throughout the response, and it should be well explained. There should also be clear application throughout the response, and this should be strong and in-depth. The answer should be cohesive, and there should be a clear structure, and technical language should be used throughout. It's important to note here then that there are 2 parts of the question that need to be addressed. Firstly, you must illustrate your knowledge of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So remind yourself now that this is the idea that the structure and vocabulary within a certain language can influence and have an impact on an individual's perception. You should also note that the question asks you to clearly apply this information to Person A and Person B and to use it to explain their experiences during their day at the art gallery. Let's read through the model response together now. The hypothesis would say that Person A's language improves their ability to perceive and express their ideas and thoughts about the paintings, resulting in them having a better overall experience. Because their language has words for different types of blue, they can think about the paintings in a richer, more detailed way. The strong version of the hypothesis suggests that someone is able to think about something if they have the words in their language to support that thinking. Person A can think about their experiences in a detailed way because their language allows them. People who speak different languages will think about things in different ways because they have different words available. Some people may not be able to think about certain things if their language doesn't include words that represent that thinking. Person B, whose language doesn't have specific blue terms, struggle with talking about the art because their language doesn't have the words that allows them to think about it in such detail. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis says that the limited language will limit their ability to perceive and discuss these different blue colours, leading to a less vivid recollection of the paintings. The weak version of the hypothesis says that people will still be able to think these things, but their ability to talk about them in detail will be reduced. This response is a good answer to the question as it effectively applies the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to explain the experiences of Person A and Person B in the art gallery. The answer demonstrates a clear understanding of the hypothesis by introducing both the strong and weak versions. This is the level of detail required to meet the top mark band. The explanation of Person A's experience aligns with the strong version, emphasising that their language, rich in specific terms for different shades of blue, allows them to think about the paintings in a much more detailed way. This demonstrates a solid grasp of the core idea that language influences thought and perception. Person B's experience is explained in accordance with the weak version of the hypothesis, suggesting that while they can still think about the paintings, their ability to talk about them in detail is hindered by the absence of specific blue terms in their language. The application of the hypothesis to both individuals in the context of an art gallery scenario is appropriate and directly addresses the question. Again, this application is required to meet the requirements of the top mark band. The technical language used in the response is clear and concise. The phrases such as richer, more detailed way and limited language will limit their ability, effectively convey the impact of language on perception and expression. Use of terms like strong version and weak version adds a level of detail to the explanation and again demonstrates a clear understanding of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Overall, the answer provides a solid response to the question, showing a good understanding of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and its application to the scenario given. The technical language used contributes to the clarity of the explanation, and the response effectively links language to the experiences of Person A and Person B. Define what is meant by postural echo. There is just 1 mark available for this question, and therefore it just requires a simple 1-sentence definition of the key concept, postural echo. So the definition that is being given here is that postural echo is the replication or reflection of body positions by individuals engaged in social interactions. This response is effective in providing a really concise and accurate definition of postural echo in the context of social interactions. It really captures the essence of postural echo by describing it as the replication or reflection of body positions. The use of clear and straightforward language makes sure that the definition is really easily understood. One sentence is absolutely fine for definition questions like this, and it fully meets the requirements of the question without any unnecessary elaboration. It does show how important it is to prepare for questions like this and to be able to quickly recall the definition of key concepts. Make sure that you build this into your revision. Overall, the response is really clear, to the point, and successfully defines the term. Describe and evaluate the function of eye contact. There are 6 marks available for the question. The mark scheme here shows us what needs to be in the response in order to achieve the 5 or 6 marks of the top mark band. The response needs to show a clear, evident, well-explained understanding of the function of eye contact. And then the evaluation needs to be strong and in-depth. Conclusions made throughout the response need to be really clear. There should be a very clear structure, and technical language should be used throughout. The key thing to note from the question here is that there are 2 parts to it: describe and then evaluate. We know that AO1 marks will be available for the description and AO3 marks will be available for the evaluation. There'll be 3 AO1 marks and 3 AO3 marks. The question needs to remain focused on the function of eye contact throughout. Here is the model answer. Eye contact helps communication by conveying emotions. It effectively communicates a range of feelings such as interest, empathy, or excitement. This builds trust between people, shows that you are listening and that they are being sincere. Eye contact also helps to regulate conversation. It helps turn-taking by showing that the speaker wants to talk and that the listener is engaged. This creates an inclusive environment that encourages participation from others. It keeps the conversation flowing and allows people to speak and to listen. The findings about the function of eye contact can be applied in various practical ways, including communication training and therapy. This is a strength because it shows that the findings can be used easily to help individuals to improve their communication skills. A limitation is the subjectivity of the research, which has used rating scales and personal judgments to measure the impact of eye contact. This subjectivity can introduce bias in the results, as everyone will report on the impact of eye contact in an individual and personal way. The results may not be able to be generalised to other people. The response is a good answer to the question, as it follows a clear and structured format, first describing the function of eye contact and then evaluating it. In the description, the answer effectively outlines how eye contact enhances communication by conveying emotions, such as interest and empathy, and by regulating conversation through turn-taking signals. The inclusion of specific examples, like building trust, showing active listening, and creating an inclusive environment adds depth to the explanation and demonstrates a really clear understanding of the function of eye contact. Giving these examples really helps the answer to achieve the detail and depth needed to achieve in the top mark band. The evaluation section is well constructed, identifying a strength and a limitation with a clear explanation for each. The strength is highlighted by explaining how the findings can be applied practically in communication training and therapy, showing a strong link between the theory and real-world applications. The limitation of subjectivity in the research is identified, and the explanation explains how relying on rating scales and personal judgments can introduce a bias and impact in the generalisability of the results. The technical language used is appropriate and accurate. Terms like conveying emotions, regulating conversations, and inclusive environment contribute to a clear and concise articulation of ideas. The examples provided also enhance the clarity of the response by illustrating how eye contact improves communication in practical contexts. Overall, the answer successfully addresses the question, combining a well-explained description of the function of eye contact with quite a thoughtful evaluation that identifies both a strength and a limitation. Technical language is used effectively to really convey the concept clearly. Explain evidence that suggests that non-verbal communication is innate. There are 6 marks available for the question. The mark scheme states that to achieve in the top mark band, so to achieve 5 or 6 marks, the understanding of the evidence should be evident and well explained, and that conclusions drawn throughout the answer should be really clear. The answer should have a clear structure and technical language should be used. It's important to note from the question here that it's asking for evidence, so the findings of studies, and the focus needs to be on non-verbal communication and the fact that this is innate. The term innate here means that we need to be suggesting and presenting evidence that shows that non-verbal communication already exists in an individual from birth. Let's take a look at this model response. Studies showing universal facial expressions for emotions like anger and happiness suggest that some non-verbal behaviours are innate. This evidence implies that certain facial expressions are biologically predetermined rather than culturally learned, supporting the idea that non-verbal communication has an innate basis. The consistency in the interpretation of emotions like anger and happiness implies that these expressions are not solely learned through cultural experience but have an innate origin. Studies on individuals born with sensory deprivation, such as blindness, demonstrate the existence of certain non-verbal behaviours, even in the absence of exposure to others displaying them. Thompson, 1941. This evidence supports the idea that some non-verbal communication is innate, as it suggests that individuals without visual input still show certain non-verbal behaviours without any external influences. The fact that individuals who have not visually observed others still display certain non-verbal behaviours indicates that these behaviours are not solely learned through imitation or observation. This response is a good answer to the question, as it follows a clear and organised structure for each identified point, providing a thorough explanation for the evidence supporting the innate nature of non-verbal communication. Each section begins with a concise point, clearly stating the evidence, and then goes on to elaborate and explain the significance of that evidence. For instance, the first section introduces the idea of universal facial expressions, pointing out the implications for the innate nature of non-verbal communication. It then further explains the biological predetermination of certain facial expressions. The second section, discussing studies on individuals with sensory deprivation, follows this same structure. It begins by presenting the evidence and then delves into the implications of this evidence, supporting the notion that some non-verbal behaviours are innate. The explanation continues, connecting the evidence to the broader concept of innate communication. The technical language used is appropriate and contributes to a clear understanding of the concepts. Terms like biologically predetermined, culturally learned, and sensory deprivation provide the specific detail that's needed in the discussion, enhancing the overall precision of the response. The examples provided, such as interpretation of emotions like anger and happiness, adds depth to the explanation, making the argument much more concrete. So overall, the answer effectively addresses the question by presenting 2 pieces of evidence and providing a thorough explanation for each. The technical language used contributes to the clarity and precision of the response, making it a well-structured and informative answer. Researchers explored the foraging habits and communication strategies of ant colonies, inspired by the influential bee study conducted by von Frisch. By observing specific ant species in their natural environments, they tracked individual ants along foraging trails to track their movements and roles. The analysis focused on communication methods, including the release of pheromones, tactile signals, and acoustic signals. The researchers monitored the ants and recorded how many of the ants used each communication method. Table 1 shows the percentage of ants that used each communication method. This is the question that then follows. On the graph paper below, sketch a bar chart to show the percentage results shown in Table 1. Include a title and appropriate labels. There are 3 marks available for the question. The mark scheme is very clear here and says exactly what needs to be included to gain the 3 marks. Firstly, there needs to be a descriptive title that conveys information. There needs to be accurate labelling of both axes, and there needs to be accurate representation of the results on the graph. It is also noting here, because the question is asking for a bar chart, that the bars should not be touching, and that if the bars are touching, correct plotting will not be credited and that mark will be lost. So we will begin by adding a title to the bar chart. We are going to take information from Table 1 here to help us. A bar chart to show the percentage of ants using each communication method. The next step is to label both of the axes, and again we're going to take information from Table 1 to help us. The percentage of ants, and then the communication method. Pheromone release, tactile signals, and acoustic signals. The final stage is then to plot the results on the graph, ensuring accurate representation of the data. Remember again that this is a bar chart, and so the bars should not be touching. The researchers collected primary data. Outline the difference between primary and secondary data. There are 2 marks available for the question. The mark scheme states that to gain both marks, the answer must be correct, so information must be accurate and it must be well explained. The question is an outline question, so brief statements are sufficient, but the knowledge on primary and secondary data must be concise and accurate. So quickly remind yourself of the definitions of those 2 terms. Primary data collected by the researcher themselves for a clear reason and for the topic of the current research study, and secondary data collected to somebody else, usually collated for a different purpose. Let's take a look at this sample answer. Primary data is gathered directly by the researcher for a specific research purpose through methods like experiments, surveys, interviews, or observations. In contrast, secondary data is collected by someone else for a purpose unrelated to the current research and is obtained from existing sources such as books, articles, databases, or previous studies. The response is a good answer to the question as it provides a really clear and concise outline of the difference between primary and secondary data. It begins by defining primary data, emphasising that it is collected directly by the researcher for a specific research purpose, and then it goes on to list various methods through which it can be gathered. The explanation for primary data is thorough and covers the essential information. The response then moves on to give the definition of secondary data, highlighting that it is collected by someone else for a purpose unrelated to the current research. It further adds that secondary data is obtained from existing sources like books, articles, databases, or even previous studies. The use of examples for both types of data enhances the clarity of the response. Overall, the answer really effectively outlines the key distinctions between primary and secondary data in a really well-organised way. This is Section C, Brain and Neuropsychology. Answer all questions in this section. There are 25 marks available, and in the exam you should aim to spend 25 minutes on this section. Identify which of the following statements best describes the function of the central nervous system. Shade 1 box only. Option A, regulating body temperature. Option B, controlling voluntary and involuntary movements. Option C, processing emotions. And option D, coordinating complex cognitive processes. The correct answer is B, controlling voluntary and involuntary movements. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord and serves as the primary control centre for the body's functions. It regulates and coordinates various activities, including both voluntary and involuntary movements. Voluntary movements are those that are consciously initiated and controlled by an individual, such as walking or reaching for an object. Involuntary movements, on the other hand, are automatic actions that occur without any conscious effort, such as the beating of the heart or the reflexive withdrawal of a hand from a hot surface. Let's take a quick look at why the other options were incorrect. Option A, regulating body temperature. So whilst the central nervous system does play a role in regulating body temperature through processes like thermoregulation, this is not its primary function. Option C, processing emotions. Emotions involve a complex interplay of various different brain regions, including those within the central nervous system, but again, the primary function of the central nervous system is not solely to process these emotions. And option D, coordinating complex cognitive processes. So while the central nervous system is indeed involved in coordinating cognitive processes, such as learning, memory, and decision making, its primary function is not limited to these activities. Additionally, the coordination of cognitive processes is not exclusive to the central nervous system, as other parts of the nervous system also contribute towards these functions. Identify which hormone is released during the fight or flight response. Shade 1 box only. Option A, insulin. Option B, serotonin. Option C, adrenaline. Or option D, estrogen. The correct response is C, adrenaline, as it accurately identifies the hormone released during the fight or flight response. When the body perceives a threat or stressor, the adrenal glands release adrenaline into the bloodstream. This hormone then triggers physiological changes to prepare the body for a rapid response, such as an increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, or heightened alertness. On the other hand, options A, insulin, B, serotonin, and D, estrogen, are incorrect. Insulin is a hormone involved in regulating blood sugar levels. Serotonin is primarily associated with mood regulation and neurotransmission, and estrogen is a sex hormone with various functions, none of which are directly linked to the fight or flight response. Consider the person's reactions to this situation. Identify 2 changes in the body when the sympathetic nervous system is active, and identify 2 changes in the body when the parasympathetic nervous system is active. Record your responses in the table below. There are 4 marks available for the question. For any question like this, where it is asking you to complete and add information to a table, the first thing is to make sure that you are inserting the information into the correct area. So note here that the first column is looking for the changes linked to the sympathetic nervous system, and the second column is looking for the changes related to the parasympathetic nervous system. Record your answers clearly in the boxes. Changes in the body when the sympathetic nervous system is active could include things like the increased heart rate or dilated pupils. Other responses could include an increase in breathing rate, increase in blood pressure, decreased saliva production, and an increase in sweating. Changes in the body when the parasympathetic nervous system is active include decreased heart rate and a decrease in blood pressure. Again, there are other potential correct answers. These could include constricted pupils, decreased breathing rate, stimulated digestion process, or a decrease in sweating. You have been asked to carry out a study to investigate individual experience of the fight or flight response. You should describe the method you will use, identify the type of data that this will collect, and explain why that would be useful, and identify 1 ethical issue that would need to be considered and how you would address this. There are 5 marks available for the question. The mark scheme is extremely structured and clearly outlines how the 5 marks can be achieved. 1 mark will be awarded for the identification of an appropriate method. Up to 2 marks will be available for the type of data and why this would be useful. And the final 2 marks will be awarded for the identification of an ethical issue and then an explanation of how this could be addressed. For the type of data and the ethical issue, a point should be identified and then a clear explanation should be given. This will ensure the safe achievement of both marks. Here is the sample answer. Method. An experiment would be used to investigate the individual experience of the fight or flight response. Participants would be exposed to a controlled stressor and their physiological responses, such as heart rate and blood pressure, would be measured during and after the task. The stressor could be a challenging cognitive task. This could involve timed problem-solving exercises. These tasks can activate the stress response without posing significant physical risk. The experiment would include a control group for comparison. Data. The data collected will be quantitative, focusing on the physiological measurements such as heart rate and blood pressure. This type of data is useful as it allows for objective and precise measurements, allowing analysis to take place. This would identify patterns and trends in participants' physiological responses to the stressor. Ethics. One ethical issue to consider is a potential psychological distress caused by the stressor. The researcher would need to closely observe the participants during the experiment and make sure that they were not showing signs of extreme distress. If this did happen, then the experiment would need to be stopped. The response is a good answer to the question as it effectively addresses each of the individual bullet points. Note the use of subheadings at the beginning of each section. This clearly signposts where each of the bullet points is being covered. Describing the method, the answer clearly outlines the use of an experiment to investigate the individual experience of the fight or flight response. It goes on to give further details about the exposure of participants to a controlled stressor and emphasising the inclusion of a challenging cognitive task, a timed problem-solving exercise, to induce the stress response without significant physical risk. It makes it really clear what the participants will be asked to do. Mentioning the inclusion of a control group enhances the experimental design and allows for meaningful comparisons. Identifying the data type, the response specifies that the collected data will be quantitative, focusing on physiological measurements like heart rate and blood pressure. Again, it's giving really specific examples of what will be measured. There is then a clear and concise explanation for why quantitative data is useful, explaining its objectivity and precision. The explanation also highlights the potential for analysis to identify patterns and trends in participants' physiological responses, contributing to a more detailed understanding of the fight or flight response. This is a real clear reason for the type of data being collected, meeting the requirements of the second part of the bullet point. Always make sure that you consider each part of the question and that nothing is left out. Tick them off one by one. Ethical considerations. The answer identifies a potential ethical issue relating to psychological distress caused by the stressor. It then proposes a really practical solution by stating that the researcher would have to closely observe participants during the experiment, stopping it if signs of extreme distress became apparent. This demonstrates a really proactive approach to participant well-being and ethical considerations. Again, this makes sure that all requirements of the question are met, identifying the ethical issue and then explaining how it would be addressed. The response is really well structured, providing a really comprehensive plan for the study while addressing the key aspects of the question. The technical language used, such as controlled stressor, quantitative data, ethical issues, contributes to the clarity and the precision of the response. Overall, it is just a really clear, thorough and effective answer. Research into neurological brain damage often uses case studies involving patients with brain damage. Evaluate the use of case studies in psychological research. There are 5 marks available for the question. In order to achieve in the top mark band and to achieve 4 or 5 marks, it states that the evaluation of case studies should be strong and in-depth, so lots of detail provided. Conclusions drawn throughout the response should be clear. There should be a clear structure, and technical language should be used throughout consistently and always in an appropriate way. Because the question is asking you to evaluate the use of case studies, we know that this means that there needs to be the presentation of both strengths and limitations. It doesn't necessarily need to be an equal evaluation, so there doesn't necessarily need to be the same number of strengths and limitations, but both do need to be presented. Remind yourself at this stage that a case study is a detailed, in-depth, thorough investigation into one individual or one specific group. Let's read through this model response together now. Case studies allow for detailed research of individual experiences or phenomena. This is a strength because it enables researchers to gain deep insights into specific cases and helps them really understand the individual. Researchers can uncover unique aspects that may be overlooked in methods like experiments or observations. Case studies are useful for studying rare or unique psychological phenomena. This is a strength because certain cases or conditions may be infrequent, making them challenging to investigate through other research methods. Case studies offer an opportunity to explore these rare occurrences in depth. A limitation of case studies is the lack of generalisability. Findings from a single case may not be applicable to a broader population. This is a limitation because the unique characteristics of an individual case might not be what is seen in other people, and the findings would not be able to be applied to others. A limitation of case studies is that conducting them can be time-consuming and may not be appropriate for large-scale research. This is a limitation because the detailed nature of case studies, while offering depth, requires significant time and money that researchers may not have. The response is a good answer to the question as it provides a balanced evaluation of case studies in psychological research, addressing both the strengths and limitations. The response starts by outlining the strengths of case studies. It identifies the point that case studies allow for in-depth understanding and exploration of individual experiences. The explanation then goes into why this is beneficial, pointing out that such detailed research allows for an understanding of individual cases that might be overlooked in other research methods. This demonstrates a clear understanding of a strength of case studies and provides a level of detail in the explanation needed for the top mark band. Likewise, the response considers the strengths of case studies in studying rare or unique psychological phenomena. The explanation is concise but still really effective, highlighting the challenge of investigating infrequent cases through other methods and stressing the opportunity case studies provide for in-depth exploration. Moving on to the limitations, the response rightly identifies the lack of generalisability as a drawback. The explanation is then clear, emphasising that findings from a single case may not be applicable to a broader population. The limitation related to the time-consuming nature of case studies is also well articulated. The response not only identifies the limitation, but it also identifies why it is a drawback, emphasising the detailed nature of case studies that require significant time and financial resources. The technical language used in terms like generalisability, in-depth understanding, and time-consuming contributes to the clarity and precision of the response. Each of the evaluative points is well structured, beginning with the identification of a strength or limitation, followed by a concise and informative explanation. This ensures a comprehensive evaluation that is suitable for the given question and meets the criteria for a top band response. Overall, the response is well balanced, thorough, and effectively communicates the strengths and limitations of case studies in psychological research. Describe and evaluate scanning techniques used to identify brain functioning. There are 9 marks available for the question. The mark scheme says that the understanding of scanning techniques should be evident and well explained, and this should be teamed up with an evaluation of the scanning techniques, and this should be strong and in-depth. Conclusions made throughout the response need to be clear, and there needs to be a clear structure to the answer. Technical language should be used throughout, and always in an accurate and an appropriate way. The fact that this is a describe and evaluate question tells us that there are both AO1 knowledge marks and AO3 evaluation marks available. There will be 4 AO1 marks and 5 AO3 marks. The question is looking specifically for scanning techniques, so this could include things like CT scans and PhET scans. The focus of the question needs to be on their role in identifying brain functioning. Let's take a look at a model response now. AO1 material will be highlighted in blue, and AO3 material will be highlighted in pink. CT scans are structural imaging techniques that allow us to see brain functioning. They use X-rays to produce detailed cross-sectional images showing the brain's size and shape. They do give information on structure, but can sometimes show injuries influencing brain function. CT scans offer detailed and high-resolution images of brain structure. This is a strength because the clarity of the images can help in the diagnosis of various conditions. They also provide quick results, making them helpful in emergency situations. This is a strength as quick decisions can be made and action taken to help the patient. However, they can expose people to radiation, which can pose a risk, especially with repeated scans. This can cause further health problems for the person. Whilst they do provide structural images, they may not capture functional information about the brain. They do not give us much information about what is happening when the brain is active. PET scans can provide a dynamic view of brain activity by measuring metabolic activity. Radioactive material, such as glucose, is injected and collects in regions of the brain with higher metabolic demand. PET scans generate colour-coded images to show varying metabolic activity levels. This helps to identify both active and less active brain regions, showing how the brain is functioning and any potential abnormalities. PET scans are good for early detection of abnormalities. This is a strength because PET scans can identify metabolic changes before structural abnormalities appear, allowing for early intervention and quicker treatment. This means that quantitative analysis of brain activity levels can take place. This is a strength as it provides precise measurements. Like CT scans, PET scans involve exposure to radiation, although this is improving. This limitation highlights a potential health concern which could cause further health problems. PET scans are also expensive. This is a limitation as the cost may restrict them being used and people not being able to benefit from their findings. This response is a good answer to the question as it provides a clear and comprehensive description and evaluation of both CT and PET scans. It shows a balanced approach by presenting strengths and limitations for each. The description of CT scans effectively outlines them as structural imaging techniques. The technical language used, such as structural imaging techniques and cross-sectional images, adds precision to the description and provides the detail needed for a top mark band answer. The evaluation of CT scans maintains a balanced perspective by outlining both strengths and limitations. Each evaluative point first identifies a strength or limitation and then provides a concise and clear explanation. For instance, the mention of detailed and high-resolution images as a strength is then explained by emphasising their diagnostic value. The mention of quick results as a strength is then justified by the importance of timely decision-making in emergency situations. The response then moves on to PET scans, providing a description of their dynamic view of brain activity and the injection of a radioactive tracer. The technical language, such as metabolic activity and radioactive material, enhances the quality of the description. The evaluation of PET scans similarly offers a balanced perspective with strengths like the early detection of abnormalities and quantitative analysis, along with limitations such as radiation exposure and cost. Each evaluative point is again accompanied by a clear and concise explanation, maintaining the balance in presenting both positive and negative aspects. The technical language used in phrases like metabolic changes, structural abnormalities, and quantitative analysis contributes to the overall clarity of the response. Overall, this answer effectively addresses the question, provides a well-structured and informative evaluation of scanning techniques, and uses technical language well. This is Section D, Psychological Problems. Answer all questions in this section. There are 25 marks available, and in the exam you should aim to spend 25 minutes on this section. Identify which of the following are potential negative effects of increasing mental health issues on society. Shade 2 boxes only. A. Strengthen community bonds. B. Reduce strain on healthcare resources. C. Improved economic productivity. D. Increased need for social care. And E. Increased cost to the government. Options D and E are identified as the potential negative effects of increasing mental health issues on society. This is due to the following reasons. D. Increased need for social care. As mental health issues rise, there is an increased demand for social care services to support individuals experiencing mental health challenges. This includes services such as counselling, therapy and community support, which can place a strain on existing social care resources. And option E, increased cost to the government. Mental health issues can lead to higher healthcare expenses, increased demand for social care services, and potential productivity losses. Governments may need to allocate more funds to address these issues comprehensively, thereby incurring additional costs. Option A, B and C were not considered potential negative effects in the context of increasing mental health issues. Option A, strengthen community bonds. This option describes a positive outcome. While mental health issues can create challenges, communities often can come together to support and understand and potentially strengthen social bonds. Option B, reduce strain on healthcare resources. This option again presents a potential positive outcome. In reality, increasing mental health issues typically contribute to a greater strain on healthcare resources due to higher demand for mental health services. And finally, option C, improved economic productivity. This option is seen as a positive outcome. Addressing mental health issues can contribute to improved productivity as individuals receive adequate support, treatment and accommodation to maintain their well-being and work capacity. In questions like this one, it's really important to unpick the wording in the question. Note here that the question asks of potential negative effects. So one way you can start to eliminate answers is to rule out anything that is talking about a positive effect. The other thing to consider is the final part of the question, increasing mental health issues. So more individuals, more people in society suffering with mental health conditions. Always focus on the direction that's offered in the question. Positive, negative, increase, decrease, more or less, as this can really signpost you in the direction of the correct answers. Explain 2 cultural variations in beliefs about mental health problems. There are 4 marks available for the question. We can see from the mark scheme here that to achieve in the top mark band, so to achieve 3 or 4 marks, the understanding of cultural variations in beliefs about mental health issues should be evident, present throughout the response, and be well explained. The answer should be cohesive, so there should be a clear structure, and technical language should be used whenever possible. So it's important to pull out from the question that it's asking for 2 cultural variations. So 2 different examples showing how beliefs about mental health issues will differ across different cultures. Present each of these differences in a separate paragraph and make it really clear where you are addressing both parts of the question. Let's take a look at this model response. Cultural variations in beliefs about mental health problems are shown in the thinking of normal and abnormal behaviours across different cultures. In some cultures, openly expressing strong emotions may be accepted as normal, while in others it could be perceived as inappropriate. What is considered a typical emotional display in one cultural context might be viewed as abnormal or disruptive in another, reflecting the influence of cultural norms. The concept of culture-bound syndromes also highlights cultural differences. An example is Koro in Southeast Asia, where individuals experience an intense fear that their genitals are retracting. This syndrome is culturally specific to the region and may not be universally recognised as a mental health issue. Similarly, conditions like anorexia nervosa were historically rare outside of Western societies, where less emphasis was placed on physical appearance, showing how the cultural context can influence the recognition of mental health disorders. This response is a strong and comprehensive answer to the question. The technical language used, such as culture-bound syndromes, demonstrates a clear understanding of the concepts associated with cultural variations in mental health beliefs. The structure of the response is really well organised, with each difference being presented in a different paragraph. This separation really enhances the clarity of the response, making it really easy for the reader to follow the distinct points that are being made. The response firstly effectively explains how cultural norms shape the perception of normal and abnormal behaviours, and it emphasises the influence of cultural context on mental health beliefs. It goes on to use the example of expressing emotion, and this example adds the required depth and detail needed to reach the top mark band. The inclusion of specific examples, such as openly expressing emotions as a norm in some cultures, and the culture-bound syndrome of Koro in Southeast Asia, again adds depth and detail to the response. These examples not only illustrate the cultural variations effectively, but also provide clear examples showing a good understanding. The mention of anorexia nervosa as historically rare outside westernised society further enhances the response. A person is struggling with addiction to a new recreational drug. Despite understanding the harm it caused, the person continues to use the drug. It has started to overshadow their work, hobbies and relationships. They no longer feel that they're able to decide about using the drug and now require more of the substance for the same relief. The person has tried to cut down but very quickly starts to feel anxious and extremely restless. The person is trapped in a cycle where taking the drug is the only thing they can think about. With reference to the International Classification of Diseases, identify 3 characteristics of addiction that the person is showing. There are 3 marks available for the question. The key thing to note about the question here is that it is an identify question, so simply bullet pointing short, brief statements and sentences is sufficient. Also note that it is asking for 3 characteristics, so make sure that these are distinct and different. And finally, to note that it's asking for reference to the International Classification of Diseases. So we know we need to be pulling from the formal diagnostic criteria for addiction. It does say with reference to the scenario, so always revisit the scenario, see what clues, see what hints have been left there, and what knowledge it triggers. This will really support you in answering the question. Start off by identifying in the scenario the fact that the person is aware and understands the harm that the drug is causing, but that they continue to use the drug. This aligns with the criteria of continues to use despite harmful consequences. This can be recorded as the first characteristic of addiction. We can then note the fact that they now require more of the substance for the same relief. This can be linked to the diagnostic criteria of observable signs of increased tolerance. More and more of the substance needed in order to bring about the same effect. This could be recorded as the second characteristic of addiction. Finally, we can note from the scenario that even though they have tried to cut down, they very quickly start to feel anxious and extremely restless. This can be linked to the diagnostic criteria of experience of withdrawal symptoms. This can be recorded as the third characteristic of addiction. Other characteristics could have included impaired control of use, an intense need for the substance, or an elevated importance placed on substance use. Neurotransmitter blues, the unfair culprit behind depression. Depression isn't someone's fault, it's a chemical conversation gone awry. Neurotransmitters, which are crucial for mood regulation, can misfire, leading to a profound impact on mental health. Understanding this is key to destigmatising depression and promoting empathy. It's not personal, it's a neurotransmitter quirk that deserves compassion and targeted interventions for a brighter mental horizon. Outline 1, biological explanation of depression. Refer to the article in your response. There are 3 marks available for the question. We can see from the mark scheme here that in order to achieve the full 3 marks, the answer must be correct, so the material that is presented should be accurate and it should be well explained, so all points should be extended with lots of detail being given. Here is the model response. Depression is due to an imbalance of neurotransmitters. As the article says, neurotransmitters play a key role in mood regulation, and when the levels of these change, it can result in depression. Depression is associated with low levels of the neurotransmitter serotonin. Serotonin plays a crucial role in regulating mood and preventing feelings of sadness and despair. If serotonin levels are low, communication between brain cells is affected. There is less serotonin available at the synapse, and therefore messages are not transmitted. This results in low mood. The response is effective in outlining a biological explanation of depression, specifically focusing on the imbalance of neurotransmitters. The clear identification of the cause of depression as an imbalance of neurotransmitters provides a really concise and accurate overview of this biological perspective. The inclusion of technical language such as neurotransmitters, synapse, and serotonin demonstrates a precise understanding of the biological mechanisms involved in depression. By including a specific example of a neurotransmitter involved in depression, serotonin, this adds the level of detail required to meet the requirements of the full marks. By explaining that depression is associated with low levels of serotonin, the response is made really specific and detailed. The mention of serotonin's crucial role in regulating mood and preventing feelings of sadness and despair again further contribute to the detail of the response. Also note that there is direct reference back to the article. In that second sentence, as the article says, neurotransmitters play a key role in mood regulation. It takes a small snippet, a small quote from the article, and then extends it and embeds it into the response. Briefly evaluate CBT as an intervention for depression. There are 3 marks available for the question. To achieve the top mark band, the mark scheme says that the evaluation of CBT should be strong and in-depth. Conclusions made throughout the response should be made really clear. There should be a clear, obvious structure to the response, and technical language should be used whenever possible. Because the question is asking for an evaluation, we know we need to present information on both the strengths and limitations of CPD used for depression. The question also says that this is a brief evaluation, and so simple statements, simple sentences are enough. The final thing to note is that the question is asking about the effectiveness of CBT as an intervention for depression, and therefore there must be clear links made to the condition throughout the response. Let's look at this model answer now. CBT has been proven to be very effective. Numerous studies have shown the positive impact of CBT on reducing depressive symptoms, showing that it really works and can really support people with this condition. Another strength of CBT is that it teaches people practical coping skills. By giving them specific strategies, CBT will allow the person to manage and overcome their depressive symptoms, making them more resilient and independent in a range of situations. However, a limitation of CBT is that it focuses mainly on thoughts and behaviours and doesn't address any other emotional or personal issues that might be causing the depression. The CBT will not address these issues and the condition may not improve. This response is effective in providing an evaluation of CBT as an intervention for depression. The 3 evaluation points are presented in separate paragraphs, contributing to a clear and organised response. Each paragraph addresses a specific aspect of CBT and it maintains a focused and coherent structure. The response maintains a consistent link to depression throughout, ensuring that the evaluation is directly aligned with the context of the question. By emphasising the positive impact of CBT on reducing depressive symptoms, the answer consistently relates the treatment to its effectiveness. The evaluation points are extended and well explained, offering depth to the evaluation. The first paragraph talks about the evidence supporting the effectiveness of CBT, enhancing the credibility of the claim. The second paragraph explains how it equips individuals with practical coping skills and extends this by mentioning how it will increase resilience and independence. This shows the specific effects that CBT can have. The third paragraph identifies a limitation by highlighting CBT's focus on thoughts and behaviours while neglecting other things that can cause depression. This is then extended with an explanation of why this limitation might hinder the improvement of the condition. This adds the depth and detail needed to reach the top mark band. Technical language is used appropriately throughout the response, with terms like empirical evidence, coping skills, resilience, all contributing to the quality of the evaluation. So overall, this response effectively meets the requirements by providing a structured, linked and detailed evaluation of CBT as an intervention for depression. The next series of questions are all focused on this research study scenario. In a 6-week experiment, researchers compared aversion therapy to self-management for treating depression. 12 participants were randomly assigned to either group. Aversion therapy involved associating negative stimuli with depressive thoughts, while self-management emphasised empowering individuals to regulate their emotional well-being. Improvement in depression was measured through standardised assessments assessing improvement in mood. Identify the independent variable in the experiment. There is 1 mark available. In order to secure that 1 mark, that is all that you need to do. Identify the independent variable. Remind yourself at this stage that the independent variable is the variable which the researcher will manipulate and change. This is when we should revisit the information that's provided in the research scenario. It tells us that the researchers were comparing the effectiveness of aversion therapy and self-management treatments. This indicates that this is the variable that the researchers were manipulating and changing, and therefore this is the independent variable. We'll firstly identify the variable as being the type of treatment that the participants were receiving, and then we'll give information on both of the conditions, aversion therapy or self-management. Outline 1 strength of an independent measures experimental design. There are 2 marks available for the question. The mark scheme tells us that to gain both of those marks, the answer must be correct and well explained. So the information presented must be accurate and well explained, so extended and detail given. It is just an outline question, so we know that brief statements and a brief expansion will be enough. And it's just looking for 1 strength. No additional marks will be given for more than 1 strength, and no marks will be awarded for the presentation of limitations. You should also remind yourself here of what an independent measures experimental design is, and we know that this consists of using different participants in each of the conditions. Let's look at this example answer now. 1 strength is the lack of order effects. Participants experience only 1 condition, eliminating the risk of order effects such as practice or fatigue effects that can occur in repeated measures designs. This response is a good answer to the question, as it clearly identifies and elaborates on a specific strength, which is the avoidance of order effects. The concise and focused nature of the answer ensures that it directly addresses the question, providing a really straightforward and relevant point. After the strength has been identified, the explanation of the strength can then be seen to be well articulated, explaining why there could be no order effects. By highlighting the elimination of potential order effects such as practice or fatigue effects, the response effectively explains why this aspect is advantageous. Participants in the study were randomly assigned to either group, aversion therapy or self-management. Outline what is meant by randomisation and why it would have been used in this study. There are 2 marks available for the question. The mark scheme says that to gain both marks, the information must be correct and well explained. If we unpick the question further, we can see that it is an outline question, so brief statements and an expansion will be sufficient. But there are 2 very clear parts to this question. Firstly, to explain and to give a definition of what is meant by randomisation, and then to link it to this specific study. Why was it particularly useful here? It's always important to identify all parts of the question and tick them off once they have been addressed. Here is the model response. Randomisation refers to the process of randomly assigning participants to different experimental conditions or groups. It would have been used in this study to ensure that participants in the aversion therapy and self-management groups were selected randomly. This helps minimise potential biases in participant characteristics, such as age, gender, or the severity of depression, which could otherwise influence the outcomes. This response is a good answer to the question, as it begins by clearly defining randomisation as a process of randomly assigning participants to different experimental conditions or groups. This concise definition makes it clear that the concept is well understood. The response then goes on to explain why randomisation would have been used in the specific study mentioned. It highlights the importance of randomisation in minimising potential biases in participant characteristics, such as age, gender, or the severity of the depression, which could influence the outcomes. This really contextualises the concept, providing a clear rationale for its application in the study. The use of technical language, such as randomly assigning participants, experimental conditions, all demonstrate a good understanding of the terms relevant to experimental design. Table 2 shows the increase in mood score after 6 weeks of intervention. We can see the data for both aversion therapy and for self-management. An improvement score is given for each of the 16 participants. Calculate the range for improvement in mood score for participants who experienced aversion therapy. There is 1 mark available for the question. Firstly, remind yourself how to calculate the range. This is when we subtract the lowest score from the highest score in the data set. So if we have a look here at table 2, firstly, we note that we are wanting to calculate the range for improvement in mood scores for those who experienced aversion therapy. And so we can look in the second column at the aversion therapy improvement in mood scores. We must then look for the highest value in the data set, which we can see is 12. And then we must look for the lowest value in the data set, which is 7. So to calculate the range, we take 12 minus 7 equals 5. The range for improvement in mood scores for participants who experience aversion therapy is 5. Calculate what percentage of the 16 participants had an improvement score of 10 or higher. Show your workings. There are 2 marks available for the question. For this question, both marks will be awarded if the correct answer is given. 1 mark will be awarded if workings are shown that are correct, but an incorrect answer is then given. So to calculate the percentage, we will firstly identify how many of the participants had an improvement score of 10 or higher. We can see from table 2 that there were 5 participants who had an improvement score of 10 or higher. We will then divide this by the 16, the total number of participants, and then multiply by 100. This gives a total of 31.25, and therefore the percentage of the 16 participants that had an improvement score of 10 or higher was 31.25. Outline 1 conclusion that the researchers could make about the effectiveness of aversion therapy and self-management from the data in table 2. There are 2 marks available for the question. The mark scheme clearly says that to gain both of the marks, the response must be correct, so the information must be accurate and it should be well explained. Note that this is an outline question, so a brief statement and expansion of that statement will be sufficient, and the question is just looking for 1 conclusion. No additional marks will be given for additional conclusions. Here is a model response. Both aversion therapy and self-management interventions resulted in positive improvement in mood scores among participants and therefore could both be said to be effective treatments for depression. The answer provides a really clear and concise conclusion based on the data presented in Table 2. It's clear that the results have been understood and effective interpretation of them has taken place. It accurately notes that both aversion therapy and self-management interventions led to positive improvements in mood scores among participants. The strength of this response lies in its direct and focused articulation of the conclusion, avoiding any unnecessary elaboration. This is great for a 2-mark question. The use of terms like positive improvement in mood scores reinforces the understanding that both interventions were effective in addressing depression.
Ouch! This is why in some videos I explain scratches.